folks. Welcome back. Welcome back. I did change shirts. I didn't realize I had a spot on the other one. So anyway, thanks for coming over. Thanks for stopping by. And welcome back to our project, The Historical Jesus, Fact or Fake. This is a project, a playlist of a series of videos in which we look at some of the early ancient attestation and evidence for the existence of a guy named Jesus of Nazareth, the same guy that we read about in the Bible. And the point of this project is to look at secular and at times hostile accounts of Jesus, the Christian movement, and try to gain information, gain data that would lend itself to the historicity of Christ, the movement that broke out like wildfire that was Christianity. And so in a previous video, a card magic video, I mentioned to some of you that I would be speaking about Suetonius today. We're going to hold off on Suetonius until I'm looking at another piece of information concerning him, and so until I can fully work through that, I don't feel comfortable presenting some thoughts on Suetonius. But in the meanwhile, let's check out a guy named Serapion. And this is a guy who lived in AD 70, and so he was a Stoic philosopher, and he wrote a letter to his son. He was in prison, and so he wrote a letter from prison to his son, and he was basically just trying to encourage him to continue to pursue wisdom. And this is what he writes. What good did it do the Athenians to kill Socrates, for which deed they were punished with famine and pestilence? What did it avail the Samians to burn Pythagoras, since their country was entirely buried under sand in one moment? And what good did it do the Jews to kill their wise king, since their kingdom was taken away from them from that time on? God justly avenged these three wise men. The Athenians died of famine, the Samians were flooded by the sea, and the Jews were slaughtered and driven from their kingdom, everywhere living in the dispersion. However, Socrates is not dead, thanks to Plato, nor Pythagoras because of the statue of Hera, nor the wise king because he lives on in the new teaching which he has given. And I'm just going to read an excerpt from Evidence That Demands a Verdict, authored by Josh McDowell, co-authored by Dr. Sean McDowell. And this is what they say. It's on page 150, just to give reference. Though Serapion never uses Jesus' name, we can be certain that he is referring to him, because no one else at that point in history would fulfill the requirements, being known as a wise king who was killed by the Jews shortly before they were driven from the land. Jesus is obviously in view. Mara certainly was not a Christian, since he puts Jesus on equal footing with Socrates and Pythagoras. Also, he has Jesus living on in his teaching rather than his resurrection. And so it is interesting to note that a writer from outside the Roman Empire has a positive view of Christ and of Christianity. However, his letter says more about Christianity than Christ. Nevertheless, what he has written does provide information that is somewhat helpful as we continue our study of the historical existence of Jesus Christ. And here's the thing. A lot of these writings from these guys, some of their writings would be considered an accurate historical representation, while other pieces of literature, other writings from other thinkers and writers is more philosophical in nature, more reflective and meditative in thought, as is the case with Marabar Serapion. I mean, this is a guy who really does not see the value in executing or persecuting people, teachers, who have something to offer. He doesn't see the value in putting them to death or persecuting them. And so he does put Jesus on the same pedestal as Socrates and Pythagoras. But, you know, obviously, Christians, we believe Jesus, being the Son of God, rose from the dead to die for our sins, rose to give us justification, that we might one day be reconciled to God in the new heavens and new earth. But here's the thing, all the theological stuff aside, all the spiritual applications and implications, all that stuff aside, and just looking at the historical value of this, we have a guy who wrote in the 70s AD, and that's fairly early. That's actually really early. Jesus died in 33 AD. So if Marabar Serapion is writing in 70 AD, then that is about 35 years later. That's not a long time. This is the stuff that historians love to see whenever they're validating someone or something in historic antiquity. And so, just by way of reflecting back on what he said, what good does it do for people to persecute these wise people, these teachers, philosophers, Socrates, Pythagoras, the wise king? Now note, this obviously had to have been Jesus because of the requirements that was fulfilled during the time. Remember, 70 AD, so that's the only person that would have been who would have filled the shoes would have been Jesus. There were some instigators also around at the time, but never have they rose to the status as wise king. Now, obviously, the Jews, practicers of Judaism, Jewish in the religious sense, would not have viewed Jesus as a king, maybe a wise person, but never a king, even though he fulfilled the messianic prophecies. But Marabar Serapion is not Jewish. He is Gentile. And if you'll just remember, when Pilate had Jesus fastened to the cross, he nailed a little sign in 3 different languages: Aramaic, Old Latin, and Greek. 3 languages that read the same thing. This statement: "Here is the King of the Jews, Jesus." And so, now whether that was a slight against Jesus and the religious thought, or the religious elite of the time, some people very well could have taken that literally. You know, obviously as Christians, you know, he is the Messianic King. But to a guy named Marabar Serapion, you know, he was the wise king who they didn't recognize because they killed him, and they suffered because of it. So anyway, guys, there's just a few thoughts on Marabar Serapion. You can look him up. You can fact check me. You can probably read a lot more than what I offered here today. So thank you for stopping by. Thank you for journeying with me on this quest to discover the secular value of early attestation, pointing to the existence of Jesus. I thank you again. God bless. And we'll see you back here next time.